que es parte de toda una serie de actos que estamos organizando en el marco de la preparación de la reunión de la COP16. Hoy contamos con el privilegio de tener con nosotros a la señora Lykke Friis, que es Ministra de Clima y Energía de Dinamarca. Bueno, es un privilegio porque por su experiencia personal, pensamos que la conferencia que nos dictará hoy la señora Friis puede ser de gran provecho para nosotros antes de la reunión de Cancún en diciembre. Antes de ceder la palabra a la señora Friis, pasaría el micrófono al profesor Boris Graizbord, que ha sido el animador de toda esa serie de actos públicos en torno al tema del cambio climático. Como todos saben, el profesor Graizbord es el responsable del programa LEAD aquí en el Colegio de México. Boris.
Muchas gracias, Jean-François. Creo que Julia tiene una representación de la Secretaría y creo que vale la pena que yo le pase el micrófono antes de presentar a la doctora.
Doctor Boris Graizbord. A nombre del secretario de Medio Ambiente, el ingeniero Juan Elvira, quien sale hoy por la tarde de comisión a África con el presidente de la República. Él hubiera querido estar en este diálogo con la ministra de Dinamarca. Y también este evento es importante mencionar que es parte de la agenda del subcomité académico de la Presidencia de la República para la organización de la COP16 que se llevará a cabo en Cancún, Quintana Roo, la última y la 1 de diciembre. Entonces, a nombre del ingeniero Juan Rafael Elvira Quesada y del doctor Adrián Fernández, agradecemos a la ministra el que comparta con nosotros esta importante conferencia y a todos ustedes muchas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy y gracias al Colegio de México, desde luego, por auspiciar esta reunión.
Muchas gracias, Julia. Bueno, me toca hacer una presentación de una pequeña semblanza de la señora Lykke Friis, Clima y Energía. Nos sentimos halagados por su presencia y tengo que destacar, I have to share with everybody the fact that when I mentioned the London School of Economics, you say it's your school. Well, it's mine too. So I'm also happy that you're here. I will read it in Spanish, and then you will start your. In English. Tengo una pequeña biografía de la señora Lykke Friis. Ella es licenciada en Ciencias Políticas por la Universidad de Copenhague y una maestría de Economía por la Escuela de Londres en Ciencias Políticas y Económicas, jefe de sección en el Ministerio Danés de la Industria en 1994, profesor investigador en el Centro Danés de Asuntos Internacionales de 99 a 2000, profesor investigador de alto rango. En 2002 trabajó como directora de investigación, es directora o fue directora de Asuntos Europeos en la Confederación de Industrias Danesas y de 2006 a 2009 vicecanciller de la Universidad de Copenhague, Vice Chancellor of the University of Copenhagen, ministra de Energía y Clima desde 2009 y presidenta actual de las partes de la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre el Cambio Climático. Y bueno, nos sentimos muy halagados de tenerla aquí. La doctora Friis will probably speak in Spanish.
I think I'll skip the Danish. That may be a bit too problematic. Well, thank you very much for your kind invitation and this excellent opportunity to debate with you the prospects for the upcoming climate negotiations in Cancun. It is definitely one of the major sort of advantages of being the COP president, which Denmark is at the moment, that one gets the opportunity to work with the presidency that comes right after you, and that is in our case Mexico. So just to show my overall sort of close cooperation with Mexico, I'm always Mexican iPhone to show that, well, there's this close cooperation between Denmark and Mexico. I can also say that I'm also happen to be the Minister of Gender Equality in Denmark, so I'm very happy to see that so many women also turned up to this particular talk, but I will obviously focus upon the climate issue as such. As we all know, the negotiation in Cancun will be and those of us who followed the one in Copenhagen can also confirm that that one was definitely also a very, very, very difficult negotiation. It's been called the most difficult multilateral negotiation ever. And it was obviously also a clear illustration of the new world order that we live in by now, in the multipolar world. Unlike, I wouldn't call it the good old days in any way, but unlike the bipolar system that we had after 45, moving into the unipolar world, or Pax Americana with America, United States of America very much being the only superpower, now into a completely different configuration of global politics that we still have to also find out how it actually works out in practice, also because what kind of governance do we have to deal with many of these problems that are obviously characterizing our interdependent world, and here climate change is only one of these issues. I think this is one of the core issues for international relations in the next many years. That is exactly how can you get a well-functioning multipolar system to work throughout the various throughout the various institutions that we have, whether it's the UN, the WTO. How should you embark upon a multilateral approach with all countries constantly in the room, as we saw in Copenhagen with the climate negotiations? Well, that creates a negotiation with 200 almost. Or should you try to develop a system where you have more a minilateral approach where countries meet in smaller groups and then obviously have to go back to the overall formal negotiation? I think this will be one of the major issues that I'm sure that also your students will look into in the coming years. With regards to Cancun, I think it's important that we say, although it is a difficult negotiation, that we focus upon what is actually possible. We should focus upon what can be achieved instead of what cannot be achieved. And being an optimist, and I guess that comes with the territory because my happiness, so I have to be an optimist and be happy. I sort of tried to come up with a motto for Cancun, and I was trying to sell it to my Mexican colleagues, and the motto should obviously be, yes we can, Cancun can. So let's see whether this will be the official slogan then of the next COP presidency. In Copenhagen, there was, you could say, the Big Bang approach. There was the great attempt to agree upon a deal, a politically binding deal that was global, that would then cover all the aspects of climate change. We came close in a sense that we got the agreement, or there was negotiation in a smaller room, going back to the minilateral approach, and there was their agreement among countries, also with your president, and thank you very much for the strong sort of also sort of political sort of will that he's put into climate change. But this particular Copenhagen Accord, as it was called, was then not agreed upon by the actual conference, by the COP as such. So countries had to associate themselves to this particular accord afterwards. And there we've seen that over 100 and what's the latest number, at least over 130 countries, or 34, have now signed up to the Copenhagen Accord. But the challenge now is obviously that progress that we managed to obtain as a building block or battering ram for the negotiations in Cancun. But talking about the Big Bang, I think it's very clear that the approach that was used in Copenhagen, where for the first time ever in the climate negotiations, one invited all the heads of states, or at least all were invited, and then many of them showed up. So this was a huge summit. This can probably not be repeated. You cannot have a situation where you build up the momentum, and we all remember also Ban Ki-moon for his statement, seal the deal, and it's now or never, and it's Copenhagen, and it was all this great focus upon Copenhagen, all this effort that was. And you can't do that, you can't repeat that and say, let's do that one more time. Because, well, just imagine if you would then not be able to agree in Cancun, how would you then be able to relaunch the process afterwards? So that's why we are in a different negotiation setup this time. This time one will use Copenhagen, the Copenhagen Accord, as a building block and try to get the various features of the Copenhagen Accord into the formal negotiation procedure, where then hopefully we can get countries to accept the various progress that was then obtained in Copenhagen. One can also say that we are now getting into a phase of the negotiation where, yes, we have the formal negotiation track. And as we all know, the negotiations usually take place in Bonn, so there will be a meeting now starting where all negotiators will go back to Bonn and meet and debate climate. Such realization is that you cannot negotiate in such a big setting. So what's happened after Copenhagen is also that the President of Mexico, Calderón, together with the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, have launched the so-called Petersberg process in Germany, a meeting that took place in spring, an informal meeting where approximately 35 countries took place at the ministerial level, so environment ministers. And there we then try, sort of in a more informal setting, to agree upon aspects, but also to push the negotiation forward. And I actually just came from the Clean Energy Ministerial that's in DC. Similar setup where you then see over 20 countries debating energy, try to come forward with some concrete solutions, take some concrete actions, and hopefully by then agreeing upon concrete projects, well, we can then not only improve the climate as such, and sort of combat climate change, but we can then also breathe, you could say, confidence into the overall negotiation process. Because once you sit there with China and India and obviously Mexico and various other countries, and you debate very concrete projects, and then you can also show where we actually mean business, we actually want to move the overall negotiation process ahead, I think that can also have an impact. And in DC, well, we had 20 countries meeting, obviously also Mexico, and these countries represented over 80% of the global electricity consumption, and they also make up 80% of the clean tech industry. So obviously when these countries get into a room, well, if we have the political will, then we can truly move things forward. We will then be seeing the next many weeks lots of similar informal meetings. There'll be one on finance, the very important issue, obviously, on how to help the developing world to be able then to, for instance, tackle climate change with regards to adaptation. There'll be a meeting on that. There'll be a meeting on technology, and all these various meetings will then lead up to the negotiations, which will then take place in Cancun. As I said, in Copenhagen, although we managed to obtain a result, the Copenhagen Accord, it was not what we had hoped for. Obviously, we had hoped for this sort of a deal where all countries signed up for it, and also a deal that could have been agreed upon by the COP as such. But one should not underestimate the result in Copenhagen. I'm not just saying that because I happen to be Danish, but because for the first time ever, one actually managed to come up with a regime where all the big emitters say, yes, we participate. We then also want to list our various actions. Look upon Kyoto. Kyoto, well, was a system, you could say, if you compare it to a boat, you would have 3 big holes in your boat. You wouldn't have United States being there. You wouldn't have You wouldn't have China, you wouldn't have India, and all the water would basically get into your boat, and that would obviously give you great difficulties in then continuing sailing ahead. For the first time ever in Copenhagen, we managed to get a common regime. We also managed to agree upon fast starts, so economic help for the developing world, also in long term, at least at the old sort of features there. So there were many aspects with regards to the Copenhagen Accord that are truly important. But as I said, since it was not then a member state, it now has to become part of the formal process. Before I get to the point about what one can then actually then obtain in Cancun, I'll just say a few words about why this particular issue is actually so important. I mean, clean energy, but obviously climate change as such. And I'll see reasons why we should definitely focus even more upon renewable energy. Because first of all, if we don't do it, we jeopardize our energy security. Secondly, we'll exacerbate the impacts of climate change. And thirdly, we will also harm our own economy, because this is obviously also an area where there's lots of green jobs involved. In other words, you could say there is no other exit from the financial crisis than the green economy. Indeed, continuing on the same road is a road to nowhere. And let me just elaborate upon that. Well, first of all, there is the very obvious fact, but it's obviously an important fact, that the world's population is projected to increase to 9 billion in 2050. So no matter how we look upon it, we are all engaged in an energy race, where energy will be a scarce resource, and where the prices with regards to energy, in particular fossil fuels, can only go one way, and that is up. We also see that the days of easy oil are over. So that's the first argument why we have to invest even more in clean energy. Secondly, well, there is climate change, and climate change is happening, and if it will continue to happen if we don't act. It is an environmental time bomb or a subprime loan, whatever metaphor you like to use, and it is also a threat to our overall economy. If you just read the World Energy Outlook 2009, well, you can see that there is an additional price tag of delayed action, up to 500 globally every year, if we simply just postpone the overall action. My third and last point, as already hinted at, well, this is also a part of the new sort of growth agenda and how we exit from the crisis. It is a huge new market, the clean tech market, basically because all countries want to limit their consumption. So you could say it is actually a bit of a golden egg. Let me just give you one figure. In 2008, investments in clean tech reached $155 billion. And let's not forget that energy efficiency is also a way for the individual company to save money. And you can say that the cheapest energy is obviously the energy that you do not use. So you can also say that energy efficiency is kind of the sleeping giant and that we have to wake up. But this could really have an impact not only on the individual company's business, but obviously also on our energy bill as such. So despite the economic crisis, we must continue the transformation to a green society. And I know that some say, well, now after Copenhagen, do we really have to continue? But we simply have. And I think that Denmark is also a very good example that, well, we have proven that it is possible to have economic growth. In Denmark, we have had a growth, well, we have grown by 80% since 1980, and our energy consumption has been more or less stable. And also our CO2 emissions have been going down. So it is possible for renewable energy and economic growth to go hand in hand. One can also say with regards to Denmark that green tech or clean tech, whatever term you like to use, now makes up a rather big part of our economy. It's basically 12% of our overall export. So you probably know about Danish wind turbines, just as one example. So yet another argument, at least for us, to push ahead with that particular agenda. If we then move back to the international negotiations, and as I said at the meeting in Petersburg, where then also my colleague Johan Elvira was there, and Norbert Röttgen, they were chairing the meeting. We debated already there what could sort of be the level of ambition that we should try to see whether we could reach in Cancun. And already there was the agreement that we should focus upon a number of key deliverables, what we can actually then agree upon, and tie that sort of into a nice package or nice sort of flowers or whatever, what metaphor there you would like to use. And just to give you a highlight of the various sort of points that we debated, well, first of all, we debated deforestation in developing countries, so the so-called REDD+ mechanism. We said, well, one of the other deliverables could be a framework for adaptation to climate change. Third one, a technology mechanism. Fourthly, improved rules for handling forest and land countries, as well as a carbon market. And fifthly, obviously, financing, possibly with the establishment of a fund. I would say since that meeting in the spring, well, we've had many other meetings, and it's still difficult to say, I mean, how far we can actually make it. I mean, what various deliverables be at the end of the day. But as I started out by saying, we should keep our eyes on the ball and we should definitely focus upon what's possible instead of just already now saying, well, this will be very difficult. The challenge will obviously be to then create a package that is then looked upon as legitimate from both sides, so both the developed world and the developing world. That will be the challenge. And we know, yes, that this also came from the United States, that yes, there is in the administration a will to push this agenda forward, but we also know that the calendar with regards to domestic politics in the United States with the Senate and so forth makes it very difficult. So we are there in a situation with lots of question marks. But I would say, and particularly with the strong sort of also sort of will by the Mexican presidency, I'm rather certain that we will be able to come up with a package. And that should obviously also be a package which should then give some signals with regards to the future. I mean, what do we do after Cancun? Because then South Africa will then take over the presidency. And there's already some coordination taking place, presidencies of Denmark, Mexico, and South Africa. So on that note, although it is difficult, I will end on an optimistic note by quoting Winston Churchill, who once said, "A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty." So maybe that should also be part of our overall thinking with regards to Cancun. Much for your attention. And now it's obviously up to you what we spend the rest of our time sort of talking about, whether you want to debate Denmark or Cancun, or that's completely up to you. I leave that in the hands of our chairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Lo que creo que vamos a hacer es tener una primera ronda, respuestas, otra ronda, y vamos a ver cuánto tiempo nos lleva esto. Entonces está abierta la mesa para comentarios, no solo la mesa, sino el salón.
Minister, welcome to Mexico. Thank you for your presentation.
Perdón, sería conveniente identificarse, por favor.
I am Alejandro Chanona, professor from the National University. I do work in a project about energy security and sustainable development, and I'm eager to see what we can get out of the COP16. And to tell you the truth, with all due respect to the minister, I don't share all your optimism. However, it depends on your answers. We may be more or less optimistic because Copenhagen as such, it's not a signed agreement. You didn't even vote the agreement in Copenhagen. And please do correct me, Minister, when I make a mistake or I am not accurate enough in relation to Copenhagen and what can we expect from Cancun. Of course, we are delighted to have Cancun to see what to do beyond Copenhagen. First of all, one of the things we don't have clear among our community doing what can we expect is even among BRICS, they don't agree what is the reference, the year reference to reduce greenhouse gases. Only Russia takes 1990, whereas Brazil and the others take 2005. Why is that? Because even Mexico, we are putting forward 2009. If I am wrong, please, the members of Semanat, I'm making a mistake. But there is this disagreement about what year to take as a reference to commit themselves. Is that a fact that in that 2009 we have got such a reduction that 2005 is not enough, and because 1990 is so ambitious that even Brazil and India and China, particularly China, is not prepared to commit to that year. Therefore, why don't you give us a wider explanation to this post-Kyoto regime? Is that possible? Well, anyway, that's one question. Second question is, do you expect, beyond our expectations, any particular binding agreement in Cancun, or is only be some sort of follow-up after Copenhagen? Because if that is going to be, we wonder, because we decided to express our opinions in relation that Mexico should lobby worldwide to make Cancun a success. And I'm really conservative, but a success would be the minimum agreement to be signed and to put across the table China and the US. Because I don't have any problem with the EU. You post on the table that you are prepared to sign up to 30% if the others sign the agreement. If they go with the commitment, we go. Otherwise, you are committed to 20, and you are Kyoto people. You are really looking at 1990 as a reference. But then 2005 and 2009, it's really a mess. And we're really confused as a community because we have done research and we don't see the political will. And finally, in order not to monopolize my questions, do you really see political will towards Cancun? I've seen our officials traveling all around, sharing with lobbying and negotiating, but I haven't heard any particular number, because Copenhagen was some sort of, we don't sign it, but we will put forward the numbers along the year. I haven't seen any clear commitment out of China or among the BRICS or even Latin America. You have a problem in Latin America. ALBA does not recognize the COP16. And you have Chavez, well, Chavez is Chavez, and all the guys in ALBA asking for the so-called climate debt, they call it. So to bring together Latin America is one problem, and we may ask amongst the Mexicans and the Brazilians and the rest of Latin America. But that question is, can we expect something out of Cancun different from Copenhagen, but sign? We are a little bit dogmatic in Latin America. We like things being signed, you know. Thank you for your answers. And once again, you are very welcome, Minister.
People are thinking, so perhaps
but this was also a very substantial question. Thank you very much, Professor Ford. Well, I mean, with regards to whether I'm an optimist or not an optimist, well, I think my overall point was that I was trying to say that we have to be optimists in the sense that we have to push this agenda because it is such an important agenda. But I did not in any way, I hope, give you the impression that I think that we will actually, unfortunately, agree upon the big deal in Cancun and there'll be a nice sort of place where we can all sign at a dotted line. That, I think, is, as I look upon negotiation right now, that's a pipe dream. We will not be able to do that. But this should not lead us into a situation where we then say, well, then Cancun is not important. Because as you rightly pointed out, the Copenhagen Accord was not accepted by the COP. So it was exactly an example of the so-called minilateral approach, where you have a sort of small number of countries agreeing upon something in a room, and then you have to go back to the formal multilateral process. And that's exactly what we've been trying to do after Copenhagen. So at the formal negotiations that again take place in Bonn, those that are drafting the negotiation text have taken the Copenhagen Accord and have now written most of the text into the negotiation text that then all the countries, the almost 200 countries, are debating in Bonn. So you're using Copenhagen then as, and the deal that was made there among the smaller amount of countries as now a stepping stone towards Cancun, and you also try to take as much as what was agreed upon in Copenhagen then to put into a formal deal then in Cancun. But we won't be able, as far as I see it, and obviously stand correct, if Mexico happens to be more optimistic, we won't get the overall, the formal deal. That will then have to wait till South Africa. I mean, so, but you will be able then to make the balanced package with hopefully the various number of deliverables, and then Mexico will hand over to South Africa, and then hopefully then in South Africa we will then be able to agree upon the formal and the agreement, the formal treaty as such. Now we're back to the legal approach. And you ask a very, very, very important question: is there the political will? And I don't think you would sort of take my word for it if I said, yes, there is definitely political will. I see a major drive now towards Cancun. I mean, I see lots of clear statements. We want to step up our game. This is not what is happening. What we're seeing is, unfortunately, the opposite. Just also take United States of America, where I just had various meetings. I maybe sort of coming from where I come from, well, Denmark, I thought, well, Deepwater Horizon, this strategy, this could possibly be a game changer in the American energy policy. Maybe this will lead them to the realization that there is a major price tag when you are dependent upon fossil fuels. So maybe they'll now change gear. But we haven't really seen that. And then when I was in Washington, some even said, well, Deepwater Horizon has been a distraction. And we lost time due to that, and then people say, well, maybe it was just because of BP, so do we really have to change our overall way of life? So no, I have to say that I'm worried about the political will, definitely. But again, nothing would be easy also for Mexico simply to say, well, then we're not going to aim at some kind of result. But then you may as well cancel negotiation. We should push, and we should push for these concrete deliverables. And frankly, we did manage to agree upon a number of things in Copenhagen that are now in the negotiation text. So it's not as if we are starting from complete scratch. So we should be able to agree upon a number of important things that will then be used by South Africa.
Hi, Minister. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. My name is Santiago Lobeira, and I'm an entrepreneur, as a green entrepreneur. I run an environmental marketing and communication company called Sustentable, and we also started a green medium for publicity to help combat their environmental strategy, advertising. I guess I do share your optimism, because I've always been an optimistic person as well. And
so the two of us will fight on. Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot of things that were achieved throughout the COP15. Unfortunately, if you ask the common people what was the result of the COP15, they will always tell you it was a failure, it was a disaster, and it was just a mess. And the question that I ask is, are there any lessons about how to communicate the good things about, the things that are, coming to an agreement, so that the common people can understand that this is a long-term process. It's not, wait for magical solutions, but that, countries are getting together, and the humanity is becoming aware of the problem. So that would be my question. Are there any lessons learned, that things that you would change in how things were done or how things were dealt in Copenhagen?
That's a very fascinating question, and I was just going to ask how much time do you have, because that's obviously been also, I mean, in Denmark, a major debate, although I must say that I would say the challenge of pushing the process ahead is so huge that we actually try to spend most of our energy on the future instead of looking backwards. Personally, for instance, I would have wished that it hadn't snowed that much because it was so cold. And that sort of also people had difficulties getting into the conference center, and this was not due, but it doesn't really matter, it was not due to the Danish government, but due to the UN system. It doesn't really matter, but that also created, as you say, this kind of image of a bit of chaos, to put it mildly. I would say, what's the lesson learned also for Mexico? I think the lesson learned is that, as I was trying to indicate, that you should get the level of ambition right. You cannot repeat that. You cannot, repeat the rhetoric about seal the deal and now it's now or never and so forth for Cancun, because then you're setting yourself up for defeat. So you should rather, sound a bit sort of, not pessimistic, but pragmatic and so forth. So yes, we're aiming for a result and these number of deliverables, try to explain how they will actually be important as stepping stones towards in South Africa. But I admit that is difficult because there was so much hope and so much enthusiasm in the run-up to Copenhagen that obviously people are disappointed. And some people also turning away from the overall issue and say, hey, why should we still engage in this particular issue? Personally, I think, some of the things you said at the beginning is very important. As you said, you are helping companies in sort of how they, as I understood you also, how they can improve their own situation with regards to their own energy consumption. And that, I think, is at least in many countries a new way of approaching the topic, because we've had such a great debate about carbon as such and about global warming and the IPCC report and so forth, but we haven't had as much focus upon energy security, how costly energy will become, the energy race, and also, frankly, how energy will become the new sort of big power politics in the future. Just look upon the United States. Already now they're spending $1 billion a day getting oil, importing oil from outside. This is the biggest transfer of money and wealth that the world has ever seen from one region to the other, to quote Henry Kissinger. You also see that China is heavily engaged in Africa. Trying to grab as much sort of as many fossil fuels as they can, coal and gas and oil and so forth. And this will determine also the influence of countries in the world, but obviously also their economic wealth. And arguments like this, you may actually reach a different constituency in a public debate than you do possibly with the climate argument. That's not because I'm distancing myself from the argument, but it's kind of, you can't sing the same song all the time. And if you pushed an issue and it didn't really work, consider what could be better arguments. And there, I think the energy security argument is definitely one that's worthwhile to pursue even further.
Victor Magaña from the National University of Mexico. In the climate change community, we frequently make use of scenarios. And you have depicted a sort of optimistic scenario in which you really hope that something happens in Mexico. But has anybody considered how long it's going to take to reach an agreement of the kind of the magnitude that we need to really do something against climate change? That's probably a very difficult issue, the ups and downs in the global politics. That means the U.S. is now in a situation in which they appear to be more interested in the entire process of negotiations. But who knows, maybe in 2 years or 3 years, the situation will change completely, and that will change the perspective that we have for the future. And the same may happen here in Mexico and in other countries. has anybody working in a scenario on how long it can? And I'm saying this because at this rate of advance that we have in the negotiations, probably it's going to take 20 years. And at least for Mexico, 20 years is too long. In 20 years, we'll be experiencing a new climate in which we have never lived before. So it's important for us to have an idea of, from the negotiators on if they have estimated how long it's going to take.
I don't think the negotiators as such have made calculations. I haven't heard of a member state either that has dared to make that particular calculation. It's pretty obvious that Denmark and Mexico, we are not making those calculations. Why not? Well, because we are kind of like the pilots, right? We are sitting there in the cockpit. We are trying to land the plane, and while you're up in the air, sort of having to steer the plane, we are not the ones that are supposed to say, hey, let's look into the engine and let's see whether we should already now change the overall sort of setup of our engine. We should make sure that we push the process ahead. But that being said, there is obviously debate taking place, probably, I mean, also quite extensively in the academic community of the lessons learned after Copenhagen. There is the debate that will pick up speed if we do not manage, but I still think we will manage, to agree upon deliverables in Cancun, or if we don't really get very far in South Africa, then I think there will be the debate about whether the present governance system with the UNFCCC that we have, whether that one is the right one. As I also indicated at the beginning of my talk, this is one of the international relations, that how do we get well-functioning institutions in a multipolar world? That debate will definitely come up. And there, you could imagine, I'm not personally arguing in favor of that, but I'm just presenting it to you as a scenario, that one would focus upon a more informal system, possibly using the Major Economies Forum, where you have countries representing 80% of the energy consumption, and you could probably also come up with very, very high figures of their carbon emissions. Could they agree on a more informal regime, kind of like the emissions, and you would then monitor each, and you would then go away from the formal, legally binding approach? It's one scenario. I'm just presenting it to you because it's definitely in the academic community. I would say presently we are in a situation where, yes, we are focusing upon the formal negotiation tracks, but together with Mexico, we are not just hoping for an agreement or hoping that we can get somewhere in Cancun. We are very, very concretely trying to launch a number of minilateral negotiations, as I was trying to indicate, with the Petersburg process, lots of follow-up meetings, the meeting I just participated in Washington, the Clean Energy Ministerial, because we shouldn't wait for the Big Bang. We shouldn't wait for the perfect agreement. We should now try to get those results that we can that will have a positive impact upon the climate. I mean, just take what we agreed upon in Washington. I mean, we agreed upon a number of initiatives which will actually lead to a situation where we would then not have to build, hundreds of new coal plants. We can just then, because we're saving so much energy, it has an impact already, tomorrow on our climate. And we should always use these particular negotiations to reach results and not wait for the big bang or the perfect agreement. But I think, just to stop that particular, or to finalize my answer, the question you ask will be very, very high on the agenda, particularly if South Africa does not really deliver the more formally binding deal. Then there will be debate about that, undoubtedly.
Does that mean, just to clarify, that means that we have to, in a way, keep aside the worries that we have about post-Kyoto? It seems to me that Kyoto is putting some pressure in terms of thinking about a binding agreement and all that sort of thing.
No, what I presented here was I'm not sure. I mean, it's not my plan, and it's part of the academic. Now that we are in a university, I think one can refer to the academic literature. It's more sort of the plan CD. I mean, if the other plans do not work out, because obviously there is a major difference. So clear from the question from the professor. I mean, whether it is a formally binding deal, whether it is also a formal regime with legal attachment and legal obligations to it, and that's obviously more a Kyoto-like framework. There's a major difference here. But again, if the answer is, okay, should we then say, if we cannot, on the basis of the formal negotiation with UNFCCC, if we cannot reach a result, should we then say, that's it, sorry guys, we cannot agree upon anything, or should we then try to come up with the CD plan? Then I'm pretty sure where I would put my eggs, and I'll say then we have to develop a new kind of system. But we are not there at the moment at all, because we are pushing, we are sitting there as the pilots in the plane, so we are focusing upon getting the plane down there safely, and also to stay within the metaphor to make sure that the plane is able to take off again to go to South Africa.
Please.
Oh, it's over there.
Minister, thank you very much. I would like to know what your opinion is on the fact that the U.S. will arrive to Cancun empty-handed, given the drawbacks of the energy bill and the difficulties that Obama's government will face in terms of the climate bill being approved. So I would like to know what's your feeling about that, and what implications will that have on the interaction between the U.S. and China, whether China will be willing to put something on the table, given that the U.S. will get here empty-handed, and not only here, we do not know what will happen next year, and it will get here empty-handed not only in terms of emissions limits, but also in terms of financing. Because the cap-and-trade bill does not pass Congress, therefore the Democrats will, notwithstanding their commitments during Copenhagen, they will have problems in getting the finance they would like to have. So how do you feel this will affect the interaction between the U.S. and China? What the impact could be on the negotiations from now on till South Africa? And thirdly, I would like to know, Minister, what your opinion is of what lessons are there to be learned from the climate change crisis about the multilateral United Nations system? Okay, so it's mainly two questions, the U.S. and China,
okay, well, that's
and the multilateral system. Okay, because how functional the United Nations organization as such has become a very important academic debate, firstly, and there are so many solutions. So I would like to know what your opinion is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very easy questions. I wish you'd also given me the answers. That would then have made it more easier for me. And with regards to the U.S., it's very clear that it will have an effect on the atmosphere of the negotiations in Cancun if the Americans do not agree upon anything, if they can't pass anything in their own domestic system before Cancun. If they manage, it will obviously be a so-called shot in the arm. It will create optimism. It will then also create this feeling that, hey, well, maybe not all, but then countries will be a bit under more pressure to deliver. Whereas if the Americans do not come up with anything, well, then you have the perfect excuse. Well, the superpower doesn't want to do anything. Well, how do we then proceed? So it does have, obviously, a major impact. But again, one should not give up, because still many of the issues that I mentioned, the so-called deliverables, they are not really dependent upon whether Obama managed to get his energy and climate bill through. You can still agree upon, let's say, a technology mechanism, you still agree upon REDD+ and so forth, all these aspects I mentioned, if there is a political will. You can obviously not agree upon something where you would then step up your game, where you would then increase the targets from Copenhagen. That's not possible. You can obviously not agree either upon a deal that would be legally binding because, well, I mean, United States administration wouldn't be able to sign up to anything because they wouldn't have passed the legislation. So it does obviously put limits to what you can obtain, but it doesn't. It should not be used to say, well, then we cannot agree upon anything. That's a very bad excuse, I would say. Then oh goodness, you asked the question about the UN system. I mean, as far as I've understood it, I mean, there will be a process that will be launched now. Also, a new high-level group in the UN where one will look upon sustainability in a broader fashion, where a new high-level group will be set up by Ban Ki-moon. And that particular high-level group will also look into the more institutional mechanisms of the climate negotiations. And as far as I remember, the deadline will be about 2012 for this particular process. That gives us some time, again, to go back to my pilot metaphor, then to see how far we make it. And then you can then possibly have the debate about what should be the overall lessons learned from Copenhagen, Cancun, and then South Africa. I can only give you my personal impression by now. I mean, I come from an organization, obviously the most developed organization with regards to governance that we have in international relations, the European Union, my old field as a scholar. And I was completely shocked, I must admit, when I became Minister of Climate Negotiations just in the run-up to the COP, and I asked, well, so what are the rules of the game? I mean, where's my booklet where I can look and figure out, well, who's allowed to do what and so forth? I said, well, I'm very sorry, Minister, we do not have a rules of procedure. Not have a rules of procedure? I mean, you have tons of heads of states coming in. I mean, the next couple of weeks, how on earth will this be able to work out? And, well, I mean, now Denmark has a COP presidency, and this again, I don't know how many years one has now tried to agree upon the rules of procedure. And then, well, we've been trying to push it a bit, but everybody says, well, don't worry, because, I mean, don't spend that because you will never be able to agree upon it. I mean, so this tells you a bit about where we are. So you have, I mean, and I think one should also be fair with regards to the deal we actually managed to obtain in Copenhagen. You have the most complicated issue, climate change, which you have to deal with in a negotiation setup where the institutional mechanisms are so undeveloped. I think that is definitely a paradox in its own right. And what's the solution to that? I don't think you'll find anybody who would be able to give you the clear answer to that at the moment, except that, again, this is an issue that we should all consider, not only with regards to climate change, but also take non-proliferation, take world trade and so forth. How do we get well-functioning institutions in a new multipolar world? But since we have so many good universities, including this one, I'm sure we will be able to come up with the answers.
I think we have a last question. We're going to let the white wine to cool a little bit. So.
Thank you, Minister. I think it was quite interesting to learn about the equilibrated package possible to be approved in Cancun regarding REDD+, adaptation, technology mechanism, the carbon market, and financing. But as far as I know, this package should go along with the monitoring of country commitments, NAMAs and MRBs. And so what you just said is that this is an opportunity for Mexico going with this kind of package, if not in South Africa, and if not, that'll be the end.
I should never say it should be the end. I was just answering the question.
The scenarios.
So there are scenarios. I mean, whether it will never be the end. I mean, international relations. But on the other hand, if you time where you would then it would be appropriate to have a debate about whether the president is choosing to set up the right one, that would be obviously
Mexico.
South Africa. My overall let's not start that debate now, because we debate this now. And I can assure you, they will not agree on anything at all in Cancun. About how we should restructure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. If there is no other question, I would like to thank the Minister for giving us this her perspective, as well as all of you that have been listening. I think it's a privilege not only for academia, but also for other sectors, including government, to be try to clear up certain issues, or to discuss from the outside certain issues that are worrying us a lot. Because, for example, I learned that we share the pilot cabin. I thought Mexico thinks they are the only pilots. But thanks for sharing with Mexico. Sharing with Mexico the pilot cabin. It's very comforting. Thank you very much. So we are happy to have had this dialogue and this conversation, and I think we are almost ready to invite you to have a white or red wine next door. And thank you very much. I think Lendo would like to close the session.
Okay. Muchas gracias, Boris. Minister, thank you. I agree with what it said, and Secretary Elvira talked to you about this meeting. We're very honored that you were here and you shared with us your experience and your vision for Cancun and beyond. We've been trying in the process of towards Cancun to involve the different sectors of the Mexican society, communicate, obtain their ideas in order to have a better result. We think about the Cancun meeting as a meeting for all sectors, not only government, but all sectors should be engaged with what the academics in this case is a dialogue with the academia is very several. We've divided our organization process into different committees, and one of them has to do with the academia. So this is very helpful. The other thing is to thank Boris Graizbord. Boris Graizbord is like one of our best and closest partners, not only because he's across the street from the Ministry, but he's actually in charge of a very famous academic program that you might have heard of, which is Leaders for the Environment. It's a very product which builds leaders, and then these leaders on environmental policy, environmental international and national, domestic. And these leaders, most of them then join either international organizations, governments, or they're already working for some of these organizations, and then they do some training. But this has also been very useful to Mexico, so we would like to thank Boris. He's also a lot for organizing this, inviting the people that you have met here, and also recognition to the people who are here. Muchas gracias a todos los que estuvieron presentes en este diálogo. Gracias por el tiempo que pasaron aquí con nosotros, y nuevamente gracias, Boris.